Alrighty, happy Wednesday, lads. Back with another little video here. This one's going to be a bit on exposure. So, basically, as a quick recap from last video was the quick pulses and the pulse extenders in preparation for getting into some larger cannons. This video is going to be probably one of two before we start getting into cannons that can stack more than one sand. So we'll probably start with a 10 or a 15 stacker or something small, and then we'll work up our way up into like 2sec 384s and stuff. So we'll get bigger. Anyway, this episode is going to be on exposure. So exposure is one of two of the main elements of TNT I want to cover, the other being how it actually moves, which I'll cover in the next video. So these two videos are probably going to be in tandem. I did try and record this video a bit earlier today, including triangling. Came out to be 35 minutes long. File corrupted. I had mic issues. Re-recorded this video as like a nice little 5-minute segment. File corrupted. So I've cleared some space off my PC. So hopefully this one's going to go a bit better. With that being said, we'll get straight into it. So basically, exposure is the force applied from some TNT to another piece of TNT, sort of dependent on what's in the way almost. So there's sort of two main things that are going to go into exposure. The first is going to be distance between the piece of TNT. So if we say have a piece of TNT there and a piece of TNT there, we fire this one, and then we fire this one. This is good exposure. So you can see that TNT there moves about 3.5 blocks, 2.5, 3.5 blocks, one of those two. However, if we say have a bit of TNT here and a bit of TNT say here, and we watch this piece of TNT and we see how far it moves, that was like half a block, 1.5 blocks. So you can see that's much lower, and that's because the actual distance between the piece of TNT is quite large. So that's going to be the first thing that limits your exposure. So if you have a large gap between your pieces of TNT, you're going to say that has bad exposure. The second thing that's going to have the impact on exposure is blocks in the way. So any sort of block pretty much will have an impact on your total velocity. So if we say have TNT here, a piece of bedrock in the middle, another piece of TNT here, this is very, very bad exposure. Actually, there's like nothing. That won't move that piece of TNT at all. That's because there is this solid block in the way. So the easiest way I find to think about this is you can see when I actually fire these pieces of TNT, I have hitboxes on, so you can see this line down the bottom here. Draw a line from the middle bottom of this piece of TNT. So if we look down on it, roughly in the middle from the bottom, where that line originates from there, to say that piece of TNT there. Now if you imagine it like that, that's sort of the path that the explosion is going to take from that piece of TNT to that piece of TNT. If you have lots of blocks in the way, you're going to have bad exposure. If you have very few blocks in the way, you're going to have good exposure. So if we say have a ladder here, ladders are very, very commonly used because they block TNT as well as they provide very, very good exposure. So that's going to be one of the main things you're going to see in most cannons. So you can see, bang, nice bit of velocity there. And if we go with something, say, like a trapdoor, we drop that on the bottom. Trapdoors are also very, very popular because of their good exposure. Oh, okay. Trapdoors in most configurations are known for their very good exposure. So you can actually see in this case here, specifically with this trapdoor here, that line there is going straight through the bottom of the trapdoor. So basically what's happening there is this trapdoor is blocking most of the exposure, funnily enough. Although if you raise it into the upright position, it's going to act just like a ladder because it's got the same hitbox as a ladder. But when it's in that closed position, it blocks a lot of the exposure to it. All pretty much any other block, or most solid blocks that a player can stand on, a TNT is going to be limited by, I guess. So iron bars, chains, glass panes, lily pads, I think, actually as well. Anything that can sort of hold up an entity, if you place an entity on it and holds it up, it's going to be affected by the exposure. So let's get something a bit interesting. Let's do a fence gate. So a fence gate's a cool one, because in the close configuration here, let's fire that, you can see it actually blocks all of the exposure. However, in this open configuration here, you will see that it gets very, very good exposure. Just like that. Boom. So that's a neat little quirk about the fence gate there. What else can we use as a nice little example? We can use an end rod. So an end rod, depending on the orientation, will give different exposure. So this is going to be very, very good exposure, because you can see that when I do fire it, there's like nothing. If you draw a line from the base of that one to the base of that one, it's going to have very good exposure. However, it's going to have slightly less exposure in this configuration here, where the middle of this end rod actually goes between that line there. So you should see, yeah. You still get some of the explosion path through, as it does sort of go around it a little bit. It's hard to explain. I'm sure there's some technical genius that can explain it a lot better than I can here, but this is pretty much the best way that I think about it. So yeah, the amount of interference between, say, this piece of TNT here and this piece of TNT here, dependent on distance as well as shit in the way, that's going to be affecting your exposure. So if you want a high-powered cannon that's going to get a lot of range, you're going to be wanting to use a lot of ladders, trapdoors in certain configurations, all that sort of stuff. Of course, it will matter as well. Exposure will matter as well when you have it on an angle. So while that end rod wasn't affecting it there, the end rod might actually affect it, say, if the piece of TNT was here. We draw a line, it might intersect through that end rod. I don't really know. We can actually test that. So if we test with no end rod, and we fire that, boop. So it lands about here with no end rod. So just there. If we test it with an end rod, should block a bit. Yeah, wow, there you go. So you can see that's got much, much shorter range with that end rod in the middle. So yeah, that's definitely something you're going to need to keep in mind. This has been a pretty quick video. This won't factor in like, it'll start to factor in much more later on. So it'll be a good little 5-minute episode if you're bored or something. But yeah, apart from that, that's pretty much all I did want to cover in this video. And yeah, I guess I'll see you guys in the next one, which should be an in-depth look at the actual in-game physics of TNT and sand. So I'll catch you all then.